Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
On today's show, the Paycheck Protection Program, providing forgivable, federally backed loans to businesses to keep people employed, opened for applications today with a new round of funding, $310 billion. That's on top of $350 billion issued 2 weeks ago. But that first round, well, it had some issues to say the least. Some rather large companies got loans, and many small businesses just were shut out. Many of the hardest hit states got some of the least aid. So with this in the news, and so many businesses in deep trouble during this pandemic, I wanted to take a small look behind the scenes up in Washington, D.C. What happened? What have we learned? And as this is one of multiple rounds of economic backstopping, what's next? To do that, this episode of Your Daily Detroit is a conversation with Congresswoman Haley Stephens. The Democrat represents Michigan's 11th district, so think suburban cities like Troy, Auburn Hills, Rochester, Northville, Livonia, and Canton. I'm Jer Stays, and this is episode 493 of the podcast for April 27th, 2020. Let's jump into that conversation recorded just before the Congresswoman hit the House floor to vote on the bill that is now law. Congresswoman, what went wrong the first time, and what are you hoping to be better this time?
Well, when Washington passes $2.2 trillion, Jer, and expects it to just immediately funnel, the mechanisms in which to do that are just different. And in some ways, you kind of can look at it like the liquid coming through the funnel. It's like you almost can't pour it fast enough. That's kind of what was happening in many respects. The banks have done more lending in this last month than they did in a full year last year. And then the other thing is just, even though the goal was to do clear, simple, efficient, there's still bureaucracy, even though there's a big commitment to trim away with that. We've seen that with Michigan and our unemployment. We've got great people working in our unemployment office, but we didn't know that we would have the largest unemployment claims, a year ago. So in terms of staffing and budget and personnel, and even adding those 1099s to the unemployment opportunity, you still need the paperwork. You still need the workaround. So we had people trying to file for unemployment who are self-employed, who are gig economy workers, and they were calling and calling and calling. Well, it took 2 weeks to get that paperwork set up. So this virus has swept the shores of our great nation, and frankly, it swept the world. And this just shows you how vicious it is. It swept the world in less than a fiscal quarter. And as quickly as you can almost blink an eye, it's upended a lot of things for us. And so we are acting quickly in Congress to ameliorate, to address, to do that triage, as I was saying. And it's almost like we can't act quick enough. But there's a great shared commitment, and my commitment the entire time, Jer, particularly from when this virus hit, was we're not going to let you fail. We're not going to leave anybody behind, that everyone counts, that all lives matter. The over 40,000 lives so far that we've lost to coronavirus, may they rest in peace, and may we join their family in prayer and in memory for those lives. And for those of us who are making our way through this time period, medically as well as economically, which the two are inextricable from one another in many cases, the sanctity of life is paramount here. We are going to prioritize you equally, and we are going to make sure we all get to the other side of this healthy, thriving, and successful.
One thing I noticed in your published call for more transparency is that Michigan, you said, was 35 out of 50 states that received aid through the Paycheck Protection Program. Is that something you've been able to share with colleagues when it comes to what's happening here in the Great Lakes state?
I have been able to share with colleagues whom I have good relationships with the gravity of what's taking place in Michigan, both on the healthcare front and on the economic front. We're at double-digit unemployment. The talking, though, Jer, is different because Congress is also practicing social distance. And up until yesterday, most of us were in our home districts because the Congress was not in session. And so how you liaise and communicate with your colleagues is different, much different than how it would be if you are physically together on the floor of the House, finding opportunity to connect with your colleagues in meaningful ways. And one of the mechanisms that I have found to be so essential for this period is the power of the pen, writing letters that obviously can be distributed electronically and even shared digitally, on social media. But we have sent letters through to colleagues, to House leadership, to the Treasury Department about this disparity of funding, particularly for Michigan. And it's not to say that Michigan isn't getting any awards from the Payment Protection Program or EIDL, the loan program that we have through the SBA. However, what we are seeing is that not enough who qualify are getting this, and they've been stuck in the queue. They've been waiting. There's a lot of uncertainty. I have been personally fielding many harrowing calls, often late into the night, with constituents, with those really small business owners, small business owners who don't need a huge line, but they need something that's going to carry them through to the other side of this. And I'm talking tens of thousands of dollars. What we know from some of the data, and there's only been real limited data released, is that 45% of the funding through the Payment Protection Program went to just 4% of the applicants. So that's really quite skewed. So my business owner, who's just asking for several tens of thousands of dollars to cover their needs for the Payment Protection Program, is it being prioritized over those who are asking for more funds? Now, why is that? We've got to figure that out. And one of the things that this pandemic is really showing us is, one, we've got to accept the good faith of the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, the good faith actions of all the stakeholders. Look, I'm quick to kind of pick up the phone and harp on the bank and say, hey, what's actually going on here? And then when I talk to the banking association, it's we've processed more loans in almost less than a month than we have in a year. And we do want to service our clients. We do want to see people through to the other side. Now, is there some mechanism in their banking process that's maybe prioritizing others over some applicants over others? And, if that's the case, how do we fix that? How do we approach things equitably? But the point is, Jer, is that this pandemic is really begetting new ways of doing business. And the business of finger pointing and blame game isn't necessarily that productive. Now, I will say that we do have to call, bad actors out, and we commend our Attorney General for really taking some of the, bad actors to task. There might be a few instances, rather, in this case where, there's been some people trying to belie consumers around loans, and they're not even lenders or things along those lines. I know Dana Nessel has a real eye on consumer protection right now and fraudulent activity. But for the most part, the trusted and proven stakeholders, from our mom and shop business owner to our hardworking American to our community financial institutions, we need to find new ways to work together. And we're doing that with this sheltering in place, certainly. And then the other thing we're doing, and this is something I'm really proud of for today, is that this isn't just status quo. We've really expanded the Payment Protection Program to include a recognition for minority and women-owned businesses, for community development financial institutions. Those are those CDFIs for smaller banks. And certainly, I don't want to undercut our credit unions, because in Michigan, and this is a differentiator for our state, Jer, our credit unions are really quite prominent, and they've always played a role of great stewardship in our regional economy. I've talked to some business owners who couldn't wait any longer to hear back on the Payment Protection Program. And so they went to their credit union. They didn't get the same coverage, but they were able to get low interest. This is part of our community. This is something that the Payment Protection Program is assisting with. And then lastly, we'll just say that it's not complete. This problem economically that we're facing with the coronavirus pandemic is really quite wide and far-reaching. And while these are some necessary short-term triage steps, we've got to look at long-term economic viability, how we start seeing ourselves through to the other side of this. What does this look like? And my goodness, I get a lot from talking to these individual employers, their employees, and treating everybody with respect and dignity for all workers, and really understanding the plight as well of the sole proprietor and the role they play in our economy.
You were talking about the future. Do you have any idea what that might look like? To me, that's one of the most interesting and important points. I mean, this bill, by definition, is a temporary situation. So what does the future look like when it comes to support?
I think we've got to be very realistic here about the changing dynamics and the indicators for what a successful economic recovery is going to look like. There's so many indicators you can look at. Retail sales is a pretty alarming one, Jer. And you can look at the large drop-off in retail sales as a conundrum for a district like mine that is home to several shopping malls, downtown areas with vibrant shopping districts. And I represent from Plymouth to Clawson to downtown Birmingham to downtown Farmington to downtown Milford. And those are just downtown corridors. That's not including the 12 Oaks Mall or Somerset Mall. That's just retail, but that's a very interesting snapshot of the large decline, the just unbelievable decline in retail sales and how that's impacting one segment of our economy. And so how we reconcile and deal with that is going to be very interesting, because you can look at pre-COVID and say, well, holy smokes, by and large, retail was experiencing some hardship. I talked to the enterprises in my district, and they'll tell you they were doing fine. They were doing very well for the most part. And now, through no fault of their own, we're going to start to see some pretty interesting stories about liquidation issues, I believe. And I don't say that lightly. And so in terms of how we reconcile this on a policy front, I, as a former economic development professional, as a former Treasury official who worked in the U.S. Department of the Treasury during the last recession, I'll just say this, that we cannot feign revenue for businesses, and I think everyone appreciates and recognizes that. I can't just pretend like you have customers right now, even though you don't. But what I can say is, looking at your assets, looking at the role that you play in our economy, the jobs think of all the wonderful people who, work in retail or work in restaurant or work in hotel and lodging. And these are, by and large, all industries that are experiencing just an eye-popping decline. And in particular, you look at the cultural touchstones of our community, and these are all those cultural touchstones. We've got to find a way to come together in a public-private partnership model where government and downtowns and business enterprises of all sizes, and that's very important here because, we got to include our sole proprietors, just as we got to look at our shopping centers and our malls and say, how do we get to the other side of this?
So what about manufacturing and the auto industry?
Automotive was on everyone's mind as we were going into the $2.2 trillion relief package that was the CARES Act. And certainly as someone who worked on what was a different type of rescue for the auto industry, but a rescue nonetheless, is different than today's circumstance. What you see with manufacturing is, we are a manufacturing-rich economy in Michigan, and it is unbelievably tremendous what our workforce does every single day in these jobs, the goods that they produce, the innovation that occurs, just an incredible economic activity. Is that right now our auto industry, from the big three to the thousands of suppliers who really contribute to the final production of that vehicle, is that there is a successful hibernating taking place for our manufacturing sector. It's a hibernating that we are monitoring, absolutely, and not something that we're taking for granted. But the question of, when do you start producing again? When do you start making cars? And what is the demand for those cars? That's going to be something really important for our region to eye. And then it's going to drive other types of consumer sales back to our restaurants and our downtowns, and also how we actually physically manifest as a society again as we come out of this sheltering in place, so this staying home, staying safe. And so we've got to work together collaboratively on any type of long-term standard. And certainly one of the things here that we're learning about this virus is that we're still learning about it. There's a lot we don't know. So we've got to prioritize safety, and we've also got to recognize the unknown elements here. And we don't need to be afraid. We need to be vigilant. We need to stay committed, and we need to work together collaboratively, which is, again, why my commitment to everybody is that we're not going to let you fail, that I, as your Congresswoman, am not going to let you fail, and very much in a proverbial sense, going to link arms together and walk through this pandemic, this nightmare situation together. And we will. I have great faith in the Metro Detroit, the Detroit economy. We've got our slogans. We know what drives us. We say Detroit hustles harder. And that means something because the world has counted us out before. But look at us now. And we're going to do it again. Because in my book, Detroit always rises. We rise when times are steady. We rise when times are tough. And we will rise yet again coming out of the coronavirus pandemic.
I wanted to tell you that we have a poll up on our Patreon for our members to leave some feedback about the show. Do you like these single topic episodes? Do you prefer multiple things in episode? Headlines? Do you like that we change it up? We are growing with members in mind, and you can join them at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. You can also leave feedback in the comments there. Also, if you're not a member and you have thoughts or ideas for the show, you can always email us at dailydetroit@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. And with that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.